Hey guys, today we're in the book of Judges, chapter 5. And in chapter 5, this is called the Song of Deborah, or the Song of Deborah and Barak. And so a song is just a praise report, right? It's a story, it's a telling, but it sees the heart, right? So after the judge Deborah has now led to the killing of the general Sisera and to the king of Jabin, we can now see that we get this song. We've seen a song of Miriam. We see songs of other people as we read through Scripture. But this is basically a praise report. And I encourage you to read it. It's really good. But I'm going to break it down in some sections to kind of give you the main takeaway of this song, right? It starts out in verse 2. It says that the leaders took lead and the people offered themselves willingly, bless the Lord. She says, in order for all of what I'm about to tell you to happen, the people of Israel had to come back to God, right? The leaders were willing to lead. The people were willing to be, to give themselves to God. They repented, right? That's a part of that cycle we've been talking about. They repented to the Lord and the Lord blessed. And this is how he blessed. Starts out in verse 3, and it talks about the past, right? It talks about you went from Seir, you marched from Edom. Now, Seir and Edom is the exact same place, two different names in the scripture. But he's recalling on a story that has happened and is told about in the book of Deuteronomy. And then in verse 6, we see that what was life like under the Canaanites, right? It was oppressive. It says the villagers ceased in Israel. They ceased to be until I arose, until I became leader, until I gave myself to God and allowed him to do. Life under the Canaanites was oppressive. And then in verse 10, she tells about the victory of what happened. She remembers the victory. But notice it keeps saying, Lord, Lord, Lord. It is not Deborah's victory. It is not Barak's victory. It is the Lord's victory. Then in verse 13, it starts kind of all the way through verse 18, and it talks about the tribes of Israel that helped and the tribes of Israel that did not help, okay? And so it gives us some fact on what people of Israel trusted the Lord and which tribes did not. Then in verse 19, it talks about the battle and how the battle, she describes the battle. The kings came, they fought, they did these things from heaven and stars and all this. It's just explaining the battle that took place of killing, of chasing Sisera, of killing all of the men, and eventually to Jabin, the king. Verse 23, it says, curse Meroz. Meroz is a city, and this is a city that did not help in the battle. They kind of stayed like Sweden, hey, we're just going to stay out of this. And so she calls a curse on them because they did not help the people of Israel. And then starting in verse 24 is a praise, right? It's a blessing of Khalil, of this wife of this Canaanite, that drove the tent peg into the head of Sisera. And so, most blessed of the women be Khalil, the wife of Heber the Canaanite. He asked for water, she gave him. She was hospitable, but she put the people of Israel above all things, right? The song starts to end in verse 28, and as she's thinking about the survivors of Sisera, right? What would Sisera's mom think? What would his family think? Out of the window she peered, the mother of Sisera wailed through the lattice, right? So she realizes that even though Sisera was a bad man, even though he was a general of the Canaanites, and even though he deserved to die because he was oppressive against Israel, she still had a heart for the descendants of Sisera and how they would miss him. And then lastly, verse 31, it ends with a final praise to God. So may all of your enemies perish, O God, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. Final praise, basically, right? The enemies of God deserve to die, and the friends of God deserve to rise. And so, once again, even though Deborah was the judge, she was the leader, she was the one in which orchestrated all of this, notice throughout the whole song, she gives praise to God and God alone, not to herself, not to Barak, but to the Lord. And so the enemies of the people who are against the Lord are the enemies of the Lord, and those who are with the Lord are friends with the Lord. And it finishes and it says, and the land had rest for 40 years. So for 40 years, Israel lived in a good time with the Lord, but once again, there will be a cycle and they will turn their back on God again, and we will see that in chapter 6. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense, breaking that down of Deborah's song, and we will see you again in chapter 6. God bless.